Hello, how are you? I have an interesting story to tell you, but I just want to make sure my audio is actually going to work this time. There have been a couple instances in the past where we struggled. So this is a story of crossing paths in Nuremberg. So walking through a quiet street in a small town near Nuremberg, this is where I just traveled yesterday, I spotted a young woman who stood out amongst the crowd. Her deep complexion and the grace with which she carried herself told me she was from somewhere far away, perhaps Africa. Her brightly patterned scarf seemed to hint at her roots. As she strolled past, speaking softly into her phone in a language I couldn't identify, I wondered, what brought her here? Was she a student, a traveler, or perhaps someone building a new life in this charming Bavarian town? I had so many questions, but no way to ask. Later that evening, as I returned to my hostel in Nuremberg, I encountered another surprise. One of my dorm mates, I was staying in a hostel, so the girl who was sleeping in the bed below me, she was a young woman with brown skin, and she had her hair pulled back, and she was talking into her phone in Portuguese. So the language was unmistakable, rich, and melodic. And she was Brazilian, I guessed. And unlike the streets of the small town earlier, where her presence might have seemed unusual, in the multicultural bubble of the hostel, her presence felt perfectly at home. But still, my curiosity bubbled. What was her story? What journey had led her here to this historic German city? As I lay in my bunk that night, I reflected on these brief encounters. Germany, particularly a place like Nuremberg, with its medieval architecture and deep historical roots, might seem an unusual backdrop for these women of African and Latin American diasporas. But I imagine the paths they had taken. Maybe the Kenyan woman had come for studies or work, and the Brazilian was here on a backpacking trip through Europe. Or maybe, like me, they were simply seeking stories, experiences, and connections in a world that often feels vast and divided, but also beautifully interconnected. There's something profoundly humbling about crossing paths with strangers whose lives you will never fully know, but who stir in you a curiosity about the world. These moments remind us that every person carries a story worth hearing, and I wanted to ask these women their stories to learn more about their journeys, but sometimes we have to accept that not every story is meant to be told to us, and instead these fleeting encounters become a reminder of the richness and diversity of life, even in the quiet corners of a small German town or the transient world of the hostel dorm. To speak on this a little bit more, I just kind of wish I would have said something, because it was very clear that the girl was from Brazil and I lived there, and I could have asked her anything and I just didn't. And it kind of felt bad, because maybe she was from Sao Paulo, and I've I didn't live in Sao Paulo, but she could have been from the town that I visited, and I would have been oh my god, I know this coffee shop and that coffee shop, and I didn't even do that. But also it kind of felt this could be one of those stories where it's I'm just gonna take a backpacking trip and turn it into a life without kind of a playbook on how to do that. And I guess that's kind of what I want to talk about, kind of the woes and the problematic nature of thinking that that's a good idea. And I guess that's kind of what I want to dive into. I don't know, what do you guys think? Have you ever actually heard of anyone who's done that?